Good evening and welcome to the Governor's Town Hall meeting on abandoned and derelict buildings. I am your moderator for the evening, Melissa George. First, let me go over a few of the rules. If you could please have your cell phones or other communication devices on silent during the town hall this evening, it would be very much so appreciated. If you have to take a call, please just excuse yourself from the auditorium and you can take your call in the foyer. Attendees who wish to ask a question or comment on the record, you may stand in line behind the microphone on either my right or my left, and you will be allowed 2 minutes to ask your question or comment on the record. A counter will note the time as you begin your question or commentary. When your time has elapsed, I will thank you for your contribution, and at that time, you are asked to kindly allow the next attendee in line their turn to ask their question or provide their comment. In addition, attendees are kindly asked to keep the questions and commentary germane to this event's topic. Thank you. I'd like to introduce to you our presenter and our panelists. To my left, the Governor of the Virgin Islands, Albert Bryan Jr. From the Office of the Governor, Carl Knight, our Chief of Staff. Richard Evangelista, the Chief Legal Counsel. And as well from the Office of the Governor, Rachel Havercorn, the Deputy Legal Counsel. Thank you very much. I'd like to now present the floor to our presenter for the evening, our Chief of Staff, Mr. Carl Knight. I am so sorry. The Governor will present first with welcome remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. My voice is echoing. It's really tripping me out. Turn me down a little bit. I want to say it's great to be here tonight. And first I want to say thank you for coming out. I love the town hall meeting when we're building something. And I look around the crowd. You have community activists like Sheila Scallion. You have protesters like Coach Foy. I could call him that, that's my friend. You have people who have been long time trying to develop the town of Frederiksted, like Meredith and Mary, people who own property in downtown Frederiksted, like Keisha, cabinet members, we're all here. And we're here for, I forgot Nadine Machena, who's been working on downtown development in the enterprise zone for the last almost 20 years. And it's good of you to come because this is a community conversation that's being initiated from Government House. See, about maybe like 10, 15 years ago, I was driving through the town of Frederiksted, particular with one of my elders, and they said to me, Albert, what are we gonna do about our downtowns? Every time we have a hurricane, they look worse and worse. People are getting older, they're dying, they're leaving it to their heirs, we're not getting through probate. What are we going to do about these towns? If we don't do something soon, the whole town is going to fall apart. As you make your quest, Christiansted is really no different. Neither is Charlotte Amalia, Savan, Long Pad, Garden Street, all the same thing. Now, these blighted homes are starting to show up in our residential neighborhoods. A lot of them sometimes because they're part of the Envision program, which is taking forever to be done, or they're part of people who didn't qualify for the program because of the heirs and they didn't have the probate papers, but the house just sitting there abandoned. Tonight, we are here to talk about solutions. What you're hearing tonight, what we have to present, we're married to none of it. There's no piece of this that can be changed. We came to talk to the community because we want to hear what you have to say and what we need to put into the legislation in order to send to the legislature. Now, we heard a lot of good stuff on Monday in St. Thomas. We've met with private individuals, we've met with community groups, business groups, we've met with EDA and all the governmental agencies to come and participate in this. And the reason why we need to do this is because this administration faces real problems. Yeah, potholes are problems, but hard problems like GRS and back pay, government salaries, and how we're going to get the tax returns up to date, how we're going to improve our infrastructure. We don't shy away from them. This is a rare occasion in the time in the Virgin Islands. It's a time when we actually have the resources to do something about the derelict and abandoned buildings in our town. Now, is it scary? Of course it's scary, because you have to trust. You have to trust that the people you elect are going to do right by the people. Everything you see tonight will be about Virgin Islanders being able to keep their property. You know, the Lieutenant Governor couldn't be here tonight. He sends his regards. But he told me, he says, Albert, we do everything so people could keep their property. We printed a list of property that owes back taxes. It was pages and pages in the newspaper. And then people came in and they paid their taxes. If they couldn't pay their taxes all at one time, we made arrangements. If you made arrangements, then we didn't put your property auction up. We haven't had a successful auction in the Virgin Islands for almost 40 years. It used to be that the legislature had to vote to give people forgiveness on property taxes. The Lieutenant Governor office does it now. He doesn't wait for an act of the legislature to make sure that people can have an opportunity to do everything to keep their property. The property auction we had, I think it was 60 properties. It might have been 40. 600 people showed up to bid. 600 people showed up. We haven't had an auction in 40 years. As a matter of fact, he only auctioned up to the people who were delinquent to 2008. We have people who were delinquent back to 1979. You cannot maintain a community by continuously leaving things go by and not doing something else to do something about it. So tonight, what you're going to see, contrary to all of the rhetoric you've been hearing there is nothing in this legislation that takes property away from people. Not one. What we're proposing to do is to create a situation where you have an abandoned and derelict property. Keyword, abandoned, and you'll hear more about that. Abandoned. That means that no one has lived there for 5 years at least, and there's no work prepared to go to that building. We take that building, and we're going to meet 3 kinds of property owners. 1, people who have clear title to their property. So we want to meet those people where they are. We want to create programs so that if you live in a neighborhood and we plan to develop that particular neighborhood street, you're going to have an opportunity through grants and loans to improve your property. Whether you improve it or not, you live there, that's up to you. Now, then you have people who live on a property that they don't have title to. We're going to have opportunities for them too, to give them the necessary things they need to do to get through probate. Then you have people who you have 30 years, no clear title. You're going to be able to get those people to get to a situation where we create an estate for the family mota. And that estate for the family mota will have all of the property rights of that individual estate. What happens next? You have a conservator that represents the rights of the owner that goes and says to the court, we want to take this property and develop it. Then that person will get with a developer. The developer will invest in the property for 15, 20, 25, or 30 years. And during that period, they will have a prescribed amount of interest that they can make on their money. So you're not going to have a situation where somebody's going to come in and make 30% every year on their money. They're going to have a surprise. So you can't make more than 14% or 15% interest on your money. Any money over that goes into the estate trust that we created. After that time, 15 years, wherever the investment is amortized over, that means just like your mortgage, the investor turns the property back over to the estate. Property is developed, owners, homeowners, or whoever owned the heirs get it, they get it right back. If the account is still not settled, we can negotiate. During that time, if any time you win the lottery or whatever, of course, the person who put in their money to develop it, you could buy your property back from them. Buy them out and get your property back immediately. So that's the basic concept we're going under. So whatever happens, that person retains the right of ownership of the estate. We want to keep Virgin Islanders in homes. You know what the alternative is? The alternative is that we auction the properties, like the law says we are supposed to do. And we don't want to do that. That's turning it over. So we want to, Carl, my chief of staff, is going to lead you through the proposal tonight, and it's just a proposal for discussion. We didn't have the chance to do a lot of this in the first term because of COVID, but we want to hear your ideas, because these are our ideas. We don't know everything. You do. You know stuff that we don't know because you're out there every day. So I'm not going to talk much longer. I just wanted to introduce that. Let's all be respectful of one another tonight. Let's try to create a piece of legislation that we could put together, and then I'll sit with the legislature. And then after that, they're going to have hearings in order that you could testify again whether you like or dislike what it is we propose. But until that time, I'm asking for your positivity, your patience, and your due respect. Thank you very much.
So much, Governor. Now we'd like to introduce our presenter, Chief of Staff, Mr. Carl Knight.
Sure. Thank you very much, Melissa. Greetings again, Governor. Greetings, colleagues. Greetings to you, the listening audience, those of you viewing over the internet and social media. My name is Carl Knight, and I'm going to give you the slow version of the faster version that the Governor just gave you. We're going to walk through this process very slowly. A few things I want to just punctuate that the Governor said. One, we're not married to these ideas. There are different ways to approach revitalization and addressing blight in our communities. We are hoping to add a tool to the toolbox that we can utilize. It might be part of a solution. It might be a solution in addition to other solutions. But we have to acknowledge that there are things that we have tried in the past that have not achieved the level of success that we would have liked it to achieve. And so we have to keep trying until we figure out the path forward, because the blighted conditions of our communities are accelerating faster than the solutions that we have put on the table in the past. We know, going back to, there were blighted properties going as far back as you could think. We know it got accelerated by Hurricane Hugo. We know that before we could recover from Hugo came Marilyn. We knew there was a bunch of little storms in between, and just when we thought we were catching ourselves, we lost the refinery. We know that we went through a great recession. Then came the 2 Category 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, that did more damage. Then came the pandemic, and we realized, we questioned, I know in Government House, we questioned the census data when it came out and told us that our population had dropped by some 20,000 people. But if we are real with ourselves, as we walk through our neighborhoods, we know the houses that used to be occupied that are now empty. We know the neighborhoods where children used to run up and down, and there's no children on those streets anymore. And we could see that we're having an increasing number of abandoned and ultimately neglected properties, not just in our towns, not just historic properties, but right there in our neighborhoods next door to us. So the question is, what do we do about it? I want to reiterate what the Governor said. This is us trying to thread a very fine line of how do we help a property owner that may not have the wherewithal, a property owner that may not have the vested interests in rehabbing their property. How do we assist them while also respecting and preserving their property rights, their ownership rights? How do we do this without dispossessing Virgin Islanders of hard-earned property? So every conversation, every dialogue starts with some foundation. We can't just have it wouldn't be productive to have a free-for-all conversation without some basis. And so the Governor has a proposal. It's a concept that he's worked on for a while. I'm going to take you through that concept. And ultimately, we are going to, every time we have a conversation, we modify, we make adjustments. Some of you that we've spoken to before might recognize some of the recommendations that you've made as part of this presentation as we tweak it as we go along. Ultimately, as we get through this process, we hope to have something that us as a community can agree to as a consensus that this is a path forward and this will help more than it will hurt. So with that, let me begin the presentation. Quick synopsis of the process, and I'll go through each of these in more detail, but it starts with a petition to the court. The court makes a determination as to the status of the property. A conservator is assigned by the court. The conservator has to present a plan for approval by the court. The court monitors the execution of that plan. Once the terms of that plan have been met, the court terminates the conservatorship. Let me explain what all of that means. Next slide. The initiation of the action. So there's two ways that this process can begin the way that the governor has conceived it. One, you can petition as an individual property owner. You may want to petition the court for the assignment of a conservator. There are reasons why someone may want to do that. Perhaps you are an absentee landlord. You're probably getting notices now saying that your property is blighted or whatever. You might have divided ownership and you can't agree on what you want to do with this property, but you're watching it become run down and deteriorated. You might just not be in a position, knowing that you have property that you may have inherited or otherwise acquired, but you're just not in a position to do right by that property. And so I want to first off establish that the first way of entering this process is actually voluntary, that there might be a compelling reason why you may want to have a conservator become the caretaker of a property that you are in possession of. The second way of entering this process is involuntarily. You may petition the court and say, hey, there is a property next door to mine that has been abandoned, neglected, it's deteriorating, and I want the court to do something about it. I want somebody to remedy this blight on my neighborhood, in my community. And then the court would then have a hearing and make a determination as to whether or not further action needs to be taken. So a petition can be filed by an interested party in the Superior Court. The next slide. Let's define abandoned or derelict. So in order for property to even be considered for this process, it has to meet certain definitions. It has to be abandoned or derelict. So the first condition is the building cannot have been legally occupied for at least 5 years prior to the petition. That's a requirement to even begin the process. Let me harp on that for a minute. So it's important that we're talking about properties that are abandoned, not occupied. Well, let me get through the definitions and I'll come back to that example. It also has to meet some additional criteria. The building has to be a public nuisance, blighted or unfit for human occupancy. It has to be a building that requires substantial rehabilitation, meaning it's in really bad shape. Perhaps it's a fire hazard, and in that regards, an imminent danger. Perhaps it's susceptible to unauthorized entry. People are just coming in and out, doing what they want in the property. It's not in any way secured, not boarded up. Anybody can access it and do what they want. Perhaps it's an attractive nuisance to children, meaning, hey, the children in the neighborhood are playing in there. There are dangerous conditions in that building, and yet children are entering and playing. It's an attractive nuisance to children. Most importantly, the building may be an attractive nuisance for illicit purposes, including prostitution, drug use, vagrancy, other illicit activities taking place within that property. Or perhaps it's attracting rodents, or there's an accumulation of debris, garbage, uncut vegetation, abandoned vehicles. Otherwise, just, it's a dumping ground in the community. Or the appearance or the condition of the building is negatively impacting the economic well-being of the residents or businesses that are in the immediate proximity of that building. The first condition has to be met in every case. The building has to not be legally occupied for at least 5 years, and then at least 3 out of the remaining conditions, as we have conceived it, at least 3 out of the other 5 conditions have to be met in order for the property to be considered a blight on the community. So to give an example, there's a house in my neighborhood that has been vacant for the last 3 years. In a couple of years, it would have met the first definition of being an abandoned building, having not been legally occupied. It would have been a vacant building, not legally occupied for at least 5 years. But if you don't live in that neighborhood adjacent to that house, you wouldn't know that it's vacant because the grass is cut. The owner put a fresh coat of paint on it a couple years ago. Every once in a while, somebody turns on a light switch. And other than those of us that know the status of that property, you can't tell that that property is vacant. In other words, while it's vacant, it is not a blight on the community. The property owner is maintaining that property, and therefore it would not be able to meet any of the other conditions listed here to be considered a blight in the neighborhood. So I want to make that distinction. We are looking at properties that are a blight and have been neglected by their owners, not properties that folks are taking care of. Next slide. Who can petition the court? I mentioned some of this earlier. So the owner of the building, like I said, can actually petition the court, say, look, me and my 5 siblings, we own this house, it's falling apart. None of us have the wherewithal to take care of this, but we understand that the Women's Coalition is looking for emergency housing for women and families. Therefore, we want to offer up our property for conservatorship as long as we can retain our ownership rights of that property. That's a legitimate option that the owner of a building can take. A lien holder or a secured creditor can also file a petition. Hey, they owe me money. This property was a commercial property that used to generate income to pay off the loan or the debt that they have to me. It's now in disrepair. It's no longer generating income. I would like the court to take an action because unless that property is earning income, I can't get paid out for my indebtedness that the property owner has to me. That might be a reason. A resident or business, I said, in immediate adjacent, so a resident or business owner located within 1,000 feet of that building could file a petition. A development organization could file a petition. Like I said, perhaps a organization dealing with homelessness or housing or some other community development can file a petition. And the government of the Virgin Islands or one of its instrumentalities can file a petition and say, hey, it's in the best interest of the community that this property be deemed abandoned and neglected. Perhaps the fire service might say, or VIPD might say, hey, we know this property in this neighborhood is a crack house. It's been abandoned and neglected. We want the court to take an action to provide a caretaker to remedy that situation for us. And so the government of the Virgin Islands, or one of its instrumentalities, can also file a petition to the court. Next slide. Who are eligible to serve as conservators. So if a petition is filed to a court, the court deems that yes, in fact, the property is abandoned and a blight on the community, the court can then appoint someone to serve as a conservator. The conservator can be one of only 3 entities. It can be a pre-qualified nonprofit organization. It can be a government agency, or it can be that one in the middle, which is a concept that we're still fleshing out, which is a redevelopment authority. The reason why we put that one in the middle is because there's a realization that there is no government agency that is currently solely tasked with the responsibility of redeveloping our towns and our neighborhoods. We have programs, like we have programs in HFA for neighborhood revitalization. There's a program in DPNR for similar or similar revitalization efforts. The EDA, of course, has its enterprise zone program. There are various government agencies that take on various aspects of this problem, but no one government agency that has been identified as being solely responsible for remedying blight throughout the community. So we've left the door open for the possibility that one day we may want to at least identify an entity that is responsible for the redevelopment of our towns and neighborhoods. So we've left that door open. The other two exist right now, the pre-qualified nonprofits, government agencies, and I'll explain, of course everybody knows, I gave some examples of government agencies. I'll explain what sort of nonprofits can pre-qualify to serve as conservators. Next slide. You have to be, in order to be an eligible candidate for conservator, you have to be a nonprofit organization, a 501c recognized organization. I think we have settled on at least been in existence for at least 5 years prior to you serving or being considered as a conservator. And you have to have as the core purpose of your nonprofit one of these five missions. You either have to be in the core business of blight remediation, community development, economic development, historic preservation, or in the business of promoting affordable housing opportunities. You have to be able to demonstrate that you've been doing this as your core mission of your nonprofit organization for at least 5 years prior to being considered to be a conservator on a property or offering yourself up to be the conservator on a property. Next slide. So there's a balance here. The concept as we've proposed, it does its best to preserve ownership rights, but we also have to make sure if some nonprofit organization is going to take on somebody's neglected property that's creating a blight in the neighborhood, they also have to have some rights as well to preserve their interests. Why would they take on that risk? Why would they take on that responsibility? Why would they obligate themselves to the court to do right by that property unless they themselves had the ability to do what was necessary to do right by that property? So the conservator has the right to exercise the same rights as a property owner would have as it relates to improving, maintaining, and managing the property. They have the right to collect any outstanding debts that is owed to that property. They have the right to contract for the repair and the maintenance of that property, to enter into a lease or rental contract, to engage whatever legal, accounting, or other professional expertise they need. They have a right to apply for grants on behalf of that property. They have the right, the only time they can exercise the right to sell that property is with the explicit authorized permission by the owners. So one of the myths that I want to dispel, there's nothing that we're proposing that dispossesses a property owner of their property. The conservator and the role of the conservator is to act at the behest and on behalf of that property owner or owners to remedy the blighted condition of their property. They cannot take ownership of that property, nor can they sell or transfer title to that property unless the owner explicitly says, I'm authorizing you to assist me in doing so. If there are multiple owners, they need the consent of every one of those owners to consent to such a transaction. And so there are conditions where an owner might say, hey, I don't like getting summons to court to talk as to why my property is falling apart. I have been living in Idaho for the last 30 years. Sell the property, send me the proceeds. I'm fine with that. If they give consent for that sort of a transaction, it can take place. Otherwise, no property can change ownership without the owner's consent. Next slide. The conservator has a responsibility. So they have a responsibility to the property owner. They have a responsibility to the court. They have to first present a cost estimate. They have to present a plan. And that plan has to include a cost estimate. This is what I propose to do with this property, and this is what I think it's going to cost based on the estimates that we've worked up. They have to show a financing plan. This is how we're going to cover that cost. Perhaps we're going to use some grants. Perhaps we're going to generate some rental income. They have to demonstrate to the court that they have a financial plan as to how they're going to remedy the blighted condition and how that's going to be paid for. They have to file, so they file an action plan that describes in great detail to the court for the court's approval what the rehabilitation of the property is going to look like, or in some instances, it might not be economically feasible to rehab a property. Maybe it's just too far gone. So maybe what they file with the court is, hey, the best I can do for this property is board it up, paint it up, clean out the yard, and make it look nice. Because it will never be able to pay for itself. Or maybe their proposal, quite frankly, with the owner's consent, is, hey, this property is too far gone, it can't be brought back, I can assist in finding financial resources to push it down and level a lot. Whatever that plan is, whatever is filed, that is a conversation with the court. The court has to approve that plan. The owner has a right and input in that conversation, and they have to stick and abide by whatever plan they have presented. I should point out that the owner has a right, even as the court is appointing a conservator, to weigh in on who that conservator is. To say, hey, of these folks that are pre-qualified, these nonprofit organizations that can serve in this role, if you're going to name a conservator for my property, I want it to be these folks over here and not those folks. The owner has a say in the due process. Everything goes through the court so that there is due process, that there are hearings. And this plan, ultimately, as filed with the court, is what the conservator is now held to. You have represented that you can assist this property owner in remedying this blighted condition that the community has complained about. You have filed this plan saying this is how you're going to do it. And now you're going to file quarterly reports demonstrating your progress towards this plan. Next slide. The conservatorship has an end. It doesn't last forever. It can end in a variety of ways. One, preferably, the purposes of the conservatorship has been met, the blighted condition has been remediated, and the costs and expenses incurred to remediate that condition have been covered, paid for, and the developer, contractor, whoever has actually done the work on behalf of the nonprofit conservator has been paid out, and they're done. That's one way this conservatorship can end. It can end if the owner requests that it end and says, hey, 5 years ago, you told me my property was blight, it was neglected, and I really was in some hard times. I wasn't in a position to do anything with the property. I'm now in a much better position, or I've now passed that property on to my heir, and they are now petitioning the court to say, hey, maybe Pops couldn't do right by the property, but I'm in a much better position. I can remedy the blighted condition, and so I'm petitioning the court to end the conservatorship and allow me to resume control of the property. It can also end if the property, for whatever reason, is sold, and the proceeds of the sale have been distributed to the owners, and I guess brokers and whoever else were part of that real estate transaction. If that's done, that also ends the conservatorship automatically. And finally, if the conservator demonstrates that despite their diligent efforts, they are unable to do right by that property owner, they are unable to stick to the plan that they filed with the court, and they're failing to achieve what was necessary to remediate that blighted condition, the court can prematurely terminate that conservatorship and say, you're obviously not the right one to take care of this property. You can no longer serve as caretaker of this property, and they can terminate that conservatorship. Whether another conservatorship is filed or not, that's again up to the court. Perhaps the blighted condition has been remediated sufficiently, but that's a decision that the court can make if they find that the conservator is failing in their duties. I do believe that's the last slide. Let me hit me one more time. I do believe that's the last slide. That's a synopsis of the process, a quick run through. Again, there's a way the program would assign a conservator to remedy the blighted condition. That's why they exist. That conservator has the right to engage contractors, developers, whoever it is they need to engage to do what's necessary to remedy that property. Their role in this process is to make sure that it's done in a manner that preserves the owner's rights and to provide accountability to the owner and to the courts that this is being done in a proper manner. The court is the arbiter as to who should serve in that role as conservator and whether or not they are in fact abiding by the conditions of the plan that they have filed with the court. Once that blighted condition is remedied and whatever costs incurred have been addressed, the conservatorship terminates. If the conservator is failing in their duties, it can be terminated. The owner can also step in and say, hey, while I wasn't able to do this before, I now want to take back control of my property. So that is in a nutshell, the concept, Governor, of what we have been discussing for the last few weeks. And I'll take it from there.
And I just want to let you know, like, we're adding to this all the time. So last night, Monday night, when we were in St. Thomas, a couple of things that the crowd recommended. They wanted to make sure a conservatorship, the nonprofit, was in existence. We had it at 1 year. They wanted 5 years to feel secure. Another thing that people recommended, which we thought was prudent, was money set aside for education about creating trust for your family and being able to make sure that it's passed down, writing wills and deeds. We already do some of that already, putting more. Also, setting aside money for legal aid for people who, I mean, if your house is run down already, you probably don't have the money to hire an attorney. So setting aside money for the attorney already. I mean, when you listen to this, imagine if we had these resources in 2020. I mean, in 2002, people would be turning over brand new properties in Frederickstead, Christiansted, and Charlotte Amalie back to families or right now. Now, the main purpose of this, when we initiated it, because Carl and I have been working on this for at least 10 or 12 years, was to stop the blight in our downtowns. Since the hurricanes, we're now looking at neighborhoods where we have abandoned buildings that we may need to apply this to, and also empty lots. A lot of you have empty lots. You call the administrator's office on both islands, 3 islands, and say, hey, I want these cars to move off of this lot, but if it's not your property and it's not the government property, we can't touch the cars. So that's another thing it would remedy. But the other thing it would remedy is it would bring life back to our towns. See, the funding sources we're going to use for this is HUD, CDBG funds. So what we would have to do with the majority of the renovations is actually create home ownership. And those rentals, because we can't sell people property. Those rentals would create opportunities now for affordable rents in our towns. When we conceived of this, it's not only just because, we paved every road in Frederickstead town, and people keep saying Frederickstead looked terrible, Frederickstead looked terrible. So I took my eyes off the road and looked at the houses. It was like, how are we going to fix this? It would beautify the town, but then you would have people actually living in our downtown areas. Now, we want to have a mix here because we don't want to have all residences. We want to do some Airbnbs and stuff too. So you get people coming in, tourist opportunities to stay downtown. And then once you have people living there and tourist opportunities, then you also have businesses that want to set up. So we want some commercial space too. So HUD regulation says that the mix has, I can't remember what the mix is, but the majority of it has to be affordable rentals, which handles a rental problem that we have on all 3 islands and starts to bring down the rent. Is this going to be easy to do? No. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No. But we have to start working on the legislation now so we can be able to get the money out and be able to do this. Because let's be honest, there's not going to be a lot of people lining up to fix abandoned buildings and invest in abandoned buildings in town unless the government makes it sweet. How does the government make it sweet? We pledge to create loan opportunities and grant opportunities. So together with those opportunities, people will be able to build back their homes, and people will be able to come in, invest, and make rental property available for people. Is that going to fix it alone? No. We're still going to need to add lighting, sidewalks, cameras, police presence, and other services that makes those communities safe. So it's a way to reduce crime as well. And that's very important. I see my good friend in here, I ain't gonna call her name, but we have a great housing finance development in downtown, but it's across from bars and houses of ill repute that stay open all night and make noise. Nobody wants to live here. We're gonna have to clean up those situations as well too. So that's the only way I think we make our towns better. Now we're gonna open up the floor for comments or questions. We're all ears. Let her rip.
And I think just one more thing, Governor, because of the feedback we got in St. Thomas, so to put it out there up front, we do understand that the government of the Virgin Islands has to put some skin in the game. We do understand that we too have properties that are contributing to blight and neglect. That became a big talking point when we did this in St. Thomas a couple nights ago. And so while we're moving on those properties, we know what they are, especially those in our towns, whether it's the building out there by Ingeborg Nesbitt in Frederickstead, or it's the Masonette building on Hill Street in Christiansted. We're aware of that. We're also going to put skin in the game. The approach that the governor has proposed, and I don't think he discussed it earlier in his remarks, is that we do want to have revitalization projects that target priority areas. We do want to kind of go in there as a government, put in the infrastructure, as he mentioned, the lighting, the whatever is necessary, do right by our buildings in that area, in that target area, and in so doing, hopefully incentivize the private sector, the nonprofits to step in and take conservatorship of some of the other properties that are privately held. So we do understand that we do have to put some skin in the game, and we're prepared to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knight. I just wanted to reiterate at the time. So attendees, you are asked to limit your questions for 2 minutes. The question and answer period will be limited, and there will be a hard stop at 7:50. Then we will give ending remarks. So we'll need you to make sure that you are in line to ask your question. You have 2 minutes to ask that question or the comment for the record, and a counter will note as you begin your question or your commentary. And when your time has elapsed, I will just thank you for your contribution. And at the time, you are asked to kindly allow the next attendee in line their turn to ask the question and provide their comment. In addition, please maintain this evening's topic. If you, by chance, are not able to ask your question on this evening, there is a QR code located in the lobby that you can scan with your phone, and you can submit your question, and your question will be answered. Thank you. We'll begin to my right, and the question will be asked by anyone on the panel that can answer your question, ma'am or sir.
Okay.
You may go, ma'am.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to ask Mr. Knight, who talked in just at the last minute there about government-owned properties. And the government-owned property that I'm most concerned about is the State Whim Museum, Plantation Museum, and library and grounds. You talk about this program using HUD and CBDG funds. You haven't talked about FEMA funds. I haven't heard a thing about FEMA tonight. What about FEMA for WIM, and where is the process going? Also, the lease on WIM is up at the end of September. There is a renegotiation of the lease. What is the procedure for that renegotiation of the government lease for that property?
I'll take the question. It's not really related, but I'll answer it anyway. So, WIM belongs to the government, but is on lease to the Landmark Society,
yes,
who's already gone through much of the FEMA process. That lady sitting down right in front of you, Miss Adrienne Williams-Octolin, has created a situation where I think it's it's pay an invoice for them. So all they have to do is get their architecture together, get the contractor together, and FEMA pays on invoice. I think they're having a little dispute among their board members and the management. I've seen the emails go back and forth. I'm trying to stay out of it, but the Landmark Society looks like they're making some progress at this point, and any negotiation, I haven't seen their lease, what kind of options it gives them in terms of renewal, but we don't have another organization at this time willing to take that over. So without looking at the lease at this point, I think we're just going to renew the lease for them.
What about public notification of the opportunity to have, get that lease?
Right, as I said, ma'am, I haven't read the lease. I don't know what it said. It may give them 2 20-year options to renew. It may give them a 5-year option to renew. I don't know what the release said.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's under property and procurement. I think we could I'll look into it and see what the lease says.
Hello, good evening.
I'm sorry, ma'am. We're going to go to my left.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet. This is a very important subject, revitalization of the towns. And I only have a couple comments. One comment is, first and foremost, the rehabilitation of government buildings in these towns. For example, the old Danish hospital that's on Strand Street in the most prominent part of town. That's been abandoned, derelict for years and years. It's very prominent. It's a substantial building. It would be wonderful to see something happen with that. So in addition to attention to government buildings in these towns, is the return of government services to these towns. You know, years ago, like the food stamp office used to be located in Frederiksted, and that helped to bring people to the towns. You know, when that was moved out of town, so many of the government services have been moved out of the towns. But that would be one way to help revitalize the towns, to give people a reason to come to town. And those are just, and another government building is the library in Frederiksted that's been closed for so many years. Libraries can be community centers. They can, you know, be used to promote education for adults and children and literacy and great sources of information for the community. So I'd love to see the library in Frederiksted be revitalized as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The library is already out for RFP. When is that? So the library in Frederiksted is already awarded the construction. It'll start in the next month. I think we're just about finished with Florence Williams in Christiansted. The hospital building you refer to, we have been trying to we have a couple proposals in government agencies that have been watching that, but I think a beautiful building like that on the waterfront of Frederiksted should be associated with tourism. We're trying to figure out a way that we could get that developed as part of one of the hotels down there, either King Frederick or the Fred. And one of the things you said, yes, the government buildings in town and everywhere we are paying attention to, they are a big part of what we're doing here tonight.
The other thing I mentioned was returning government services and
yes.
administration to the towns.
The problem with our towns is that there's no parking. And so it just seems like every employee drives 2 cars. So that's a huge problem for us. Looking to the future, like the millennials and the Gen Zs, they don't want to come to any offices. We're trying to put my goal as governor to have every government service on a phone. Not that we won't have offices open, but then you could do business any time of the day, night, or whatever from your phone. You don't have to waste time and sit down in a government office waiting for services. So, but I hear your point. So we're trying to do other things. This is just one part of downtown revitalization plans. We're also doing other things like free internet, fixing the lighting, adding amenities, putting sports in parks, creating playgrounds. There's a lot of other stuff that we're doing depending on the town that you're talking about. So Just the town of Frederiksted alone has over $250 million worth of development planned within the next 5 years.
Please go ahead, ma'am, with your question.
Good evening, Karen Dickinson. Let me piggyback on that young lady first. You know, as good steward of the government, I think you need to set example, like the lady say. And we have so much blighted buildings and property that belongs to the government. I think we need to start there first. But secondly, I see the energy that is being placed for conservatorship through the courts. I think we need to have more judges so that we can pass probate cases for families so that we don't have to have conservators who is actually to come and take people property from them. That's the true fact of the matter, because half of us don't have money to fix up these buildings because we have issues with family and these probate need to pass through. That is one. That's two. Thirdly, you know, we sit here with this town hall meeting when we have so much other pressing issues. As we talk about these blighted buildings in town, the school has a whole lot of board that you got rotten in, and you could give it to the residents so they could board up the place and at least put a little bit of paint on it so the towns could look good. But we have the issue of WAPA, we have the issue of education, we have so much pressing issue, Albert and the group, and we're going to sit here with a town hall to basically tell our people we're bringing people in to fix our place, and when we can't pay them, they take it from we. Let's be fair and let's be true to the people, man. Everybody sit here and look good in jacket and suit while the whole community suffering while you enrich yourself. Let us be fair of what's going on in this territory. It is not derelict building. It's hunger. It's unemployment. It's economic development. And all you enriching yourself. Let's do better. Good night.
I'm coming right next.
And
I ain't gonna be quiet.
And that is an example how perfectly untouched people are, that person is, with what is going
Really?
in.
Bullshit.
Totally
Bull.
untouched.
No. Put it down. Sit it down. No. That's crap.
Audience?
Maybe
Audience?
somebody else. No, we don't
Audience?
care about you in the audience.
Can we please gain control?
No.
Audience?
No. No.
Audience?
I let her speak. I let her speak. I did not interrupt her. Celeste.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a democracy and we are allowed our opportunity to speak on any topic that we would like, but we are here for the derelict buildings and let's maintain the topic. We are able to speak on whatever topic that we so choose, but in the beginning we were asked to please keep it germane to this topic. The governor and his office and his entire cabinet is open for any questions during the operating business hours. Please maintain those questions there. Sir?
I don't even quiet.
As it relates to the question that Ms. Dickinson asked regarding the courts and the probate, the courts are actually part of this process of having a conversation, and they are in agreement that if in fact we are to move with this, that in fact we will either have a judge appointed just to serve with this conservatorship issue and probate, because we realize that there is a shortfall and a delay in the processing. And another option is to appoint a special master. So that is on the books. That's something that has been come up, and it will be included as part of this process of creating this new way to address the abandoned and derelict buildings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney Evangelista. Sir, at the microphone, thank you. Your 2 minutes.
I want to start off by saying, but what you just said was unbelievably disrespectful. That woman feeds people every single day, and to say that she is disconnected shows how disconnected you are from this community. Every day she feeds people. I have a statement to read. First, the words I'd like to read are from the great and possibly assassinated Governor Cyril E. King, whose example you clearly have never followed. Progress for whom and at what cost? Next is a poem that I think about constantly when I'm driving around this island and I see the development that you are bringing. Another beach without access, another hilltop cleared, the sudden realization that all of this development is not for us. It's not us moving up, it's the colonizers moving in. Gentrification is a process in which the poor area experiences an influx of middle class or wealthy people who renovate, build home, and rebuild homes, businesses, and which are often cause an increase in property value and the displacement of the earlier usual poor residents. What you're doing is clear gentrification. You have recently released a statement to address your grave concern over the sign in St. Thomas that it was removed. Yet I have never seen you release any statement as to your deposition in New York pertaining to the amount of campaign donations you took from a convicted child predator and human trafficker. I bring this to your concern because I bring this to share my concern that you are making decisions not for us the people, but for morally scrupulous donors as you have done in the past. I'm so angry right now, boss. What you just said to her was unbelievably disrespectful. Can you give any information as to the deposition in New York to allow your constituents to make a informed decision as to your judgment? I will now give the couple of seconds left for you to actually answer that question, hopefully. And last thing is, what you said earlier about the derelict properties or the places of ill repute, your constituents live there. And not all your constituents, most of your constituents don't have a car. So the fact that you can easily get on this stage and say that all y'all have 2 cars, get on Vitron and see the broken windows. Don't sit there and be like, you have 2 cars and somehow that's a good thing. That's something you should be ashamed of. You are a corrupt government if you're going to sit there and have 2 cars and
Thank you for your question. Your 2 minutes is completed. Sir, your 2 minutes are completed. Thank you. Sir, please have a seat. Thank you so much.
All right. Melissa. So I don't want the conversation to devolve into misinformation and we leave here misinformed. So going back to the proposal and the concept of what we're presenting, and we're open to input and ideas from anyone, any place. We are willing to take input and ideas. But I want to make it clear, a statement was made earlier by one of the earlier speakers. On this side, we are not taking anybody's property away. I think we've said that repeatedly. There's nothing that we've proposed that would allow the transfer of ownership rights of a property. Matter of fact, what we are proposing is how do we support property owners before they get their properties taken away, before it goes to auction, before it falls into disrepair and cannot be rehabbed. There's nothing here that will permit anybody from any place, colonizers or not, to take property away from Virgin Islands. And I think we've said that very clearly tonight. So I don't want that misinformation to be put on the record and left as part of the record. It is not gentrification because there's no change of ownership. Nobody's allowed to come in and take anything from us. It is not what you have seen elsewhere, and we have gone through great pains to come up with a solution that works for us as a people and to avoid those situations. So I just want to make sure that's not left as a lingering thought on the record.
Thank you, ma'am. Your 2 minutes.
First of all, who's the community you're talking about? Because it's not this one, okay? This is not the community you're talking about. First, we buy our buildings and our properties through basically pocket, out of pocket. We use susus because the banks are not helping us. They haven't been helping us. And what you're talking about 5 years is definitely not enough. The other thing is you want to talk about doing something. History is industry. We got freak up properties that instead of y'all auctioning it off and doing everything with, why don't we take those freak up properties, restore them, because then you have something that people can come to, visit, understand, talk history about, the whole 9, because they do it over in Virginia, Jamestown, Virginia. Third, I have property in front of me that's in front of my walkway where I have to get to my home. That's actually a regular driveway. That's the government's road that hasn't been cleared. Y'all don't get to clear that. So I guess mine would be derelict, depending on who decides derelict is. I have property also up east that the government owns the property behind me that needs to be cleared. So I guess that's derelict. So we need a total definition of derelict, not what you decide you're going to put up in front of us today. It needs to be all lined out, all papered out, not just stood up and spoken to, but spoken to, completely designed out. And as far as those that don't know me, I'm Celeste Foy, born and raised in Brooklyn. Mr. Knight, I got your last name too in my DNA. So I just want y'all to know that, because you think that you come in. I've seen gentrification happen all over this place. This young man is right. This is gentrification. Whose community are you discussing?
So I want to make it clear. My name is Carl Knight, born and raised on St. Croix. My family owns property throughout this territory. I just had a family reunion where my cousin was talking about his property in Grove. He asked me to go look for his property in Grove. It's overgrown and derelict. His parents, his mother has passed. His father is still living. His mother left her share of the property to him and his 6 siblings. So his 7 siblings and his father, all 8 of them, own a property in Grove that's overgrown. While we have folks looking for housing, looking for housing choice properties to rent, he wants to do something with his property. My great-grandmother, Hildred, may she rest in peace, her property is sitting in Nana's Hope. That's also my grandfather, who is now in his 80s, has done his best to maintain his property. But Hildred and his siblings, his 4 sisters, and his 1 brother, who all reside in the States, who are all in their early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, they also have a property sitting here that's been left behind when they have great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren looking for housing. This is my community too. I would never propose anything or be party to anything that has a detriment to my community or my family or the people who I have grown up and been around all my life.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Sir, at the microphone, your 2 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Flegel, and I, along with my partner, I run a triple bottom line business that prioritizes social and environmental issues here in St. Croix. I've also renovated many derelict properties over the last couple of decades. And I've read a draft proposal or draft version of the bill that you guys are proposing this evening. I think the first thing that comes up for me on this, I should say, by the way, I really like what the attempt of this is doing. I like what you're saying. I like that we're saying, how do we get these buildings that have been neglected and derelicted for so long revitalized, and with that, how do we revitalize the towns and communities that depend upon these centers for our living? But I also think that the devil is in the details on this, and there's a lot that we can say here, but I really encourage you to release the draft legislation that you have right now to the public this evening. You've collected all of our email addresses at the door, and you've done the same thing Monday in St. Thomas. So this evening, I hope, and my question to you is, will you simply send everybody that has expressed an interest a copy of the actual proposed bill so that everybody can read it and then see what the details are and make comments from an informed position after that? I think that there's a big issue here. You know, Governor started this evening with talking about trust your legislatures, trust the elected officials. And you brought up, again, Governor, like, if we had started on this 5 years ago, think about where we'd be now. 20 years ago, anytime, sure. And hindsight is always good in that way. So I'd like to say, if we were able to start again right now, could we do better with those libraries? Could we do better with other things? And so I think that this bill is a little bit too ambitious. I think that there are a lot of things in this bill that are written as law And those are the bad things, and the good things are things that are written as a plan. And the things that we can do together as a plan are the things that are really good. There's many things in this bill that talk about ways that we could address an agreement between property owners and conservators and developers. I can do that same agreement with a lease agreement. We don't need the government to do that. What we might need the government to do is to assist with getting an appointed conservator, but we don't need the courts to do this. If we want to involve the courts, we need to be talking about how is that burden on the courts, and we've heard people talk about probate this evening.
Sir, you're commenting on your question. Your time has elapsed. Let me allow a panelist to answer you.
Certainly.
Thank you.
So one of the reasons why we know the court is inundated, and we sat with the judges and they asked us, to present something to them, and then they'll comment on it. So we know the courts are inundated, but if we had come here and told you that the executive branch was going to be chief justice and jury on this, you would have been angry too. So we want to make sure that no matter who is governor, you can't just go and take people's property. That's why we have 3 branches of government, to balance the power. So we put the power in the court. Why didn't we just write a lease? Well, you can't write a lease with 32 heirs that are all over the place and are in probate. The thing that people have to realize here is the key word here is abandoned, and then 3 items of derelict. I listen to people all the time, and people always talking about how I disrespect, but what about people disrespecting the governor, not even Albert Bryan, the governor of the Virgin Islands? We are spending $300,000 to $1 million per public housing units. We're giving away people's grants for first-time homeowners up to $350,000 grants. We're funding businesses. We're rehabbing all our public housing. We're fixing the roads. We're replacing all the sewers, all at the same time. People are saying, we're still subsidizing everybody's WAPA bill. We're still paying for that. Yes, we subsidize them because it'd be a lot higher if we didn't. We don't function in a vacuum. There are a lot of things that have to be done. This piece of legislation is going to take a lot to get through. This is why we're bringing it here, to discuss it with you, not to fight with you. And people come here to fight. There's nothing to fight about. There is no... We could remove that gentleman from here because he's just being disruptive, please. Anyway, so I agree with you. It is ambitious, but we have to do something. We can't do nothing.
In reference to...
Did I answer your...
Difficult, complex cases when we have all these opportunities to deal with things that are easier to work on with abandoned properties. Starting with the properties that the government owns.
No. We will start there, but as we had originally said and conceived, we want to do blocks of communities at a time, not one-off things, because then you don't get the kind of synergy you need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In answer to your question about making the draft available,
We'll continue with the meeting. Okay. We need to continue the meeting, and we want to just continue some order. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just pay attention to over here, and we will allow everyone to have their opportunity to give their contribution. Ma'am, your 2 minutes begins. That's on the mic on my right. Yes, ma'am.
Melissa, we were trying to respond to the question.
That's fine.
Sorry, attorney had a storm. It's almost like you got to dance in front of me to get my attention. I'm so sorry.
In answer to the comment about sharing a draft, we have been working on what we think will be a good proposal, and we have been refining it. So if you've seen an earlier draft, it is substantially changed from that because of the community feedback. And we will have a draft going forward after this week that we intend to post for further comments.
Right, so just to be clear, to reiterate, we have actually circulated a proposal, shared it with several individuals, gotten feedback. This is probably the fourth conversation. Each conversation, we have a larger and larger audience as we start to take this to the public. And so we're now on version 4. And the intention is at the conclusion of these 2 town hall meetings to take that input and now produce what we want to have as the working draft that we put out to the public. So at some point, those of you that have registered your emails, etc., you will get a copy of a bill that you can now start to review. Of course, we also have to have a conversation with the Senate, and we will start to get to the process of taking it from concept to legislation, and that's coming.
Thank you very much, Chief Knight. Yes, ma'am, your 2 minutes begins.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Philippa Smith-Tyler. I'm a relatively new resident to the islands. I've been here 5 years, and I have some specifics. I'm sorry, right now, the height of anger has made me extremely sad. So excuse me while I just take a breath for a minute. The specifics I wanted to address involve properties that are not owned by individuals. The first property is the Good Hope School site, which is very blighted, a danger to health of the surrounding community. There are derelict cars left there, trash, dead animals left to rot. I made an inquiry as to who the owners are and was told there is a board of directors, but they are in dispute and cannot make determinations on what to do with the property. How do you handle situations like that? That's one question. Also, at Alexander Henderson Elementary School, stacks of wood have been sitting behind that school since I arrived in 2018, and they have not been utilized by anybody. There are so many stacks of wood. A number of residents expressed an desire to have the wood so they could fix up their properties damaged by the hurricane. Nothing has been done with that.
Ma'am, can I answer your questions as it goes? Because it's
yes.
So the Good Hope property, we actually been talking to the board about the possibility of taking over that property. It's a good property. We could use it for training and other purposes. So we are in initial negotiations with the board. When you talk about, what was the second thing you were talking about?
Alexander Henderson
The Alexander
School.
Henderson School. In the previous administration, the thought was to do the roofing program. They would bring in large tracts of wood all at one time. What happened was FEMA rejected the roofing program, the Envision roofing program, and we had to move it to HUD CDBG. So that wood is federal property. Actually, it was bought with federal money. We can't dispose of the wood because then we would have to pay back the federal government for that wood that is there by the Alexander. It's a Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority that is a steward of this wood, and we took that wood out of storage at some places because we were paying rent there for the wood, so that's why it's there.
What about...
We also have, I think we recently got a funding award for the renovation of the Alexander Henderson School. Not a funding award, but an obligation from FEMA, a determination by FEMA that they're going to fund us to do a replacement of the school there. So there's progress now being made on the Alexander Henderson School.
Okay.
And to follow up on the Good Hope School question, this program is actually, the Good Hope School could actually benefit from this specific program as to request a conservator to assist with the redevelopment of the abandoned and derelict structure.
Okay, thank you. The property that's on the picture behind, is that the old pharmacy at King Cross Street and Queen Street? What's being done with that particular property? I mean, it is a pharmacy. Was it privately owned or what?
It was privately owned, and I think it's the poster child for the types of things we've been tolerating as a community, right? So how do we help that property owner do right by a property that has historical significance in a historical part of our town? How do we assist them to get something like that from that condition to something that's no longer a blight in the town of Fredericksted.
So you are inquiring of these particular property owners what they're going to do with their properties? Are you reaching out to them? And the other property the last one, is the one on Queen Mary Highway across from Sunshine Mall.
Oh, right, same thing, someone could petition and have that declared abandoned, force the owners to speak to what their plans are for the property and make the case that they have not neglected that property. We do have privately owned properties like that ultimately we need to kind of get the owners to not ignore the fact that these properties are sitting there falling apart and being derelict. So this is what the program is for. I also want to point out, we've worked over the years with community organizations. Our town, Fredericksted, had a wonderful town plan. The vision of what we want to do with our towns is there. But we do have privately owned properties where the property owners just may not have the wherewithal, the means, and in some cases, the interests in abiding by that vision. We've had the charrettes, we've had the town plans. Now the question is, how do we as a community take that out of being a vision and a plan and actually effectuate that? How do we work with property owners to get it done? And so the Apothecary Hall and other those sort of properties, yeah, we know what we would love to see there, but we need to work with that property owner in a way that preserves their rights, protects their interests, but gets it done for the rest of us.
Thank you so much for your
Last
contribution.
question. Is there going to be a follow-up to these town hall meetings?
I'm sorry.
Is there going to be a follow-up to the town hall meetings following?
Yes. So even we don't have a piece of legislation yet. We're going to take everybody's comments and suggestions, work them into the legislation. Then we're going to call in the Senate, give them a little chance to comment. Then we'll finalize it, send it out to everybody and to the legislature. And the legislature, I'm sure, will have hearings on it as well.
I'd like to thank you for your contribution. Please be reminded that when the time has elapsed, to kindly step out of the line so the person behind you can ask their question. You have 2 minutes to ask your questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, pleasant good night to all. My name is Arlene Coggins John, and I have a couple of questions. In the last several years, we have seen an upscale of elderly abuse. What measures do you have currently in place to ensure that the conservator has the best interests of those who are unable to lobby for themselves, such as our seniors and our disabled veterans?
Good evening. If I may answer that question real quickly. So, as indicated by the governor in his presentation, what we've learned is the conservator, as you already heard, is actually going to manage and work on the use of the property, developing it. The actual owners themselves, if they feel the need to have a representative, that's why we're going to fund Legal Services of the Virgin Islands or some other legal entity to assist them to have a representative.
My second question is, Mr. Knight stated that a copy of the proposal was circulated. Who and where was that proposal circulated to?
So we've had conversations, both St. Croix, St. Thomas, with community organizations that operate within that space, community development, housing development. So some of our organizations, we've had to sit down with them to talk about what we're bringing, to make sure we're not totally off the wall in what we're proposing, and to get their feedback and input. So a lot of what you're seeing tonight that we're presenting is informed by some of those organizations. And we've sat with St. Croix Foundation, we've sat with, I think, our town Fredericksted was in our conversations. We've sat with Chant, the Chamber of Commerce. We've sat with several organizations just to get some feedback and input on how we're proceeding.
And my last question is, the old senior citizen building next to Fredericksted Health Clinic, it's very troubling. You guys are taking a look at that building and restoring it so our seniors can enjoy that building once again in Fredericksted?
We keep looking at Aldersville, and we haven't made up a decision yet as whether to restore it or what to do about it. But we are trying to create senior citizen opportunities in Fredericksted. But if it's the will of the community that we restore Aldersville, it wasn't covered in FEMA because we weren't using it. We could get a legislature to appropriate some money in order to do that. I just want to ask the senator that's in line that we allow the public to ask questions, because you're going to get a whole other shot at it. So.
Can so much.
Thank you for your contribution. Yes, ma'am.
So good evening. Good evening, Governor.
Good evening.
Evening, Chief Knight. Good evening, Chief
Good
Evangelista.
evening, good evening.
Good evening. So I want to start by saying thank you for bringing this very significant solution that I feel will positively affect Virgin Islanders. And I have two short questions. The first, in the time that the conservatorship is there, who would pay the property tax during that period of time? And then the second question is, if in the event of a storm or other disaster, who would be able to negotiate for the insurance proceeds during that time? Thank you.
So the investor would be responsible, the person so the conservator really representing the owner's rights. So they would make sure that whoever is developing that property, that in the development agreement that is covered for insurance, and that they pay the property taxes on the property as well too.
The one thing I want to point out though, any prior obligations, so the owner still has, if you have a prior obligation, a mortgage, you're in arrears of property taxes, that's still the owner's responsibility. But once the conservator takes over and says, I assume responsibility, moving forward, they have an obligation to pay any debts that property incurs.
I mean, it's a good suggestion too, that maybe for some of these properties that we put in the legislation, that once it goes into conservatorship, the property taxes are deferred as well too. So it is as another incentive for people to willingly comply with developing the property.
Thank you so much, Governor. Sir, your question, your 2 minutes.
All right, good evening. Pretty much just wanted to make a couple of comments and suggestions like the lady just did. One of my concerns or my comment would be related to financing. And we have to take in consideration the context of 5 years. That's hurricane, and that's also COVID. So while there are many people that may, at the time of the hurricane, they lost, their houses were damaged, then there was the issue with insurance. So now they're stuck in a position where they can't seek financing because currently banks are not giving loans on properties that are damaged because one, you can't at the same time receive insurance for those properties. So now in the case where we're saying that we're going to put a conservator in there, how are we going to reconcile that? And how is that? I didn't notice anything put in legislation or the draft that kind of addressed the situation with insurance and who would be responsible as far as the liabilities should something happen during that time.
Right, great question, sir. So that's why it goes to court, because the judge then would be able to listen to the person and say, oh, well, it's been COVID, it's been a hurricane, you're in the process, you're seeking, because this is not something to be aggressively taking over people's property. This is something that we want to incentivize the person. So when we're looking at for HUD funds is how can we help owners that are already deeded. So if you already have a deed in your hand, you have possession of the property, there'll be programs for people like this where we would say, just like we're doing with the VI Slice program, and say, listen, we'll give you a loan, your income could handle a loan, let's say for $100,000 for the renovation, the government is going to grant you another $100,000 for the renovation, and then you just pay back the loan. The catch in it is that you have to rent any available property on that for the going affordable rent, just like any Section 8 rent or anything else. All the liability for the property will be assigned to the conservator or the developer once that property is assigned. So the owner is exempt from any liability during the period of the conservatorship. So for some people, this is going to be a very attractive program to go into, because I think it was Ryan who said you don't need a conservator. If you're voluntary, you could go and say, listen, I want to find a developer for my place. I would like to develop it. You could serve as your own conservator or the conservator for your family, say, I would like a government loan, right? Because most people have problems with this. They have so many heirs, so they can't take control of the property. So if I alone, I got 4 brothers myself, if I want to develop my parents' property, 4 of them live in estates, I can't do anything. So I might say, hey, I need to put it into conservatorship so at least we can develop the property and get it to a standard where it's not a derelict and it's being put to good use.
Thank you so much for your contribution, sir. Ma'am?
Good evening. You mentioned that majority of the funds will come from the CDBG HUD funds. So I wanted to know if those are DR funds or MIT funds. So that's my first question. And then second, I wanted to know, I know that those funds have to be returned by 2026 if all of those funds are not used. So do you have a plan of action to utilize all of those funds on a timeline? And where is the funding going to come once that runs out and you have to return it?
Well, I think definitely for the DR funds, we're going to have to apply for a waiver because in DR funds of our housing alone, we have the Envision program, there's $195 million in there. You know, there was a comment just now, I keep talking to my OMB director and she's saying the projects aren't going fast enough. Well, there's a 4% unemployment rate here and a 3.5% in St. Thomas, St. John. There's nobody else to work. People are literally scraping at the bottom of the barrel. And with that happening, the refinery is closed, the Westin is closed, the Marriott is closed. We have several hotels being built here and in St. Thomas and other economic development that's coming down the pipe. We need people. I mean, last night one of somebody's comments was like, oh, well, we should make sure that only local people could develop these properties. Well, we don't have enough people anymore in order to do this. So when I say what's going on now, is we have, if you look at how slowly Polly Joseph, the Vitran building, it's taken us forever. We've been working on the highway for 10 years. We still ain't spent all of that money yet. So we need people to work. We need people to get in there and do the work. We're doing Harrigan, is Harrigan? No. I don't want to call it Safarelli. Walter, I am Hodge right now. If you go down there, take a look. It's coming along beautifully. But we still have at least 3 or 4 more developments to do and 200 hurricane repairs to do and another 200 houses for St. Croix alone. We don't have the people to build these things. We need to find people. So spending is a problem. I don't want to eat up your time. But just think about it. We have a $4 billion economy, right? GDP growth of 2% is massive growth. We're trying to put $800 million into the economy. That's 20% growth in GDP every single year. We simply do not have enough people to spend that kind of money every single year. If you find them, send them to me because we got all kinds of people looking for people now to be able, so we could be able to move. We have 20 new projects coming out within the next 3 months. People are not even bidding on stuff anymore because there's so much. Contractors are coming to our office and telling us, don't put out any more jobs. And we got things to build. So we need help spending the money. I'm not gonna lie. If every able-bodied citizen needs to be working.
Thank you. I would just say a suggestion would be some workforce development when it comes to some of these trades that you're looking for. So maybe using some of that money to upscale the workforce and have people to do the jobs.
Appreciate it. Yeah. And you know, I apologize to the crowd if I get frustrated because I think people either think we bluffing or they're not listening. We've dedicated over $10 million to workforce development. We got free training in every trade. We got free college tuition. We got light assistance, mortgage assistance, rent assistance, pre-K. We got so much funding going out. We need people. We need people.
I just wanted to add the question that you had, she left, that the mitigation funding, the time is 12 years on the mitigation dollars. So we have time. Adrian Williams, Office of the Disaster Recovery.
Thank you so much, Ms. Octilin. Mr. Knight, could you expound what DR funds and MTI funds are?
So the CDBG MIT versus DR. So there's CDBG disaster recovery and then there's CDBG mitigation. They're both HUD programs for hurricane recovery, but they're different tranches of funds with different rules.
Thank you for the edification. Sir, your 2 minutes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Just have one comment. You know, we're going into the 6th year of the Bryan administration, right? Mr. Bryan, your opening remarks, you mentioned trust. I don't know if you remember, but in your opening remarks, you mentioned that individuals may not trust what you all are presenting. We must understand that this administration haven't given us much to trust. So when you all come here before us in this auditorium and we don't trust what you're saying, it's based on what you have shown us. In my 57 years of being alive, I've realized that everything is relevant. It may not be relevant to me, it may not be relevant to anyone else, but everything we see unfold before us is relevant to someone, right? And I'm saying all this to say, a lot of the plans that this administration has is not relevant to the people of the Virgin Islands, to the masses of the Virgin Islands, because, you know, we have been lied to so many times concerning our schools, concerning our children's education, concerning hospitals. So my advice to this administration, you all need to work on the trust issue you all have here in the Virgin Islands. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your contribution. Ma'am?
Yes, good evening. Thank you very much for convening this town hall. It is of utmost importance. My name is Dr. Jessica Samuel, and I have 3 specific, somewhat detail-oriented questions. So the first is this concept of the possibility of leasing and renting properties that would have been revitalized. I wonder if you could speak to where the profits or proceeds of those leases would go once enacted by the conservator. That's one question. The second is pertaining to the fees that would be incurred during the revitalization process, right? So once there's a conservator, they've developed their plan, they've begun the process of revitalizing, remodeling, renovating, what have you. How are those terms going to be negotiated, the terms of repayment between the conservator and then the title owners? I would like to hear more details around that. So, you know, I think one of the things that people are thinking about is once something has been remodeled and renovated and all the fees and labor and the loans taken out to do so, will these title owners be left with a big hefty bill that they can't repay? So could you speak some more to like negotiations and what that would look like? And then finally, this is to the point of gentrification. Gentrification is something that is oftentimes not intended. Most of the time, no person, no developer or government agency means to create displacement and dispossession, but we know that it often is an unintended consequence when these sorts of revitalization projects occur. So I'm hoping you could speak to some of the mitigation plans or ideas you have in mind for when these revitalization projects come to a completion. What will happen to the landlords who are neighbors to the homes that are renovated and their property taxes or their property value increases? What are we going to do in the incident or case where they themselves can't even afford to live there anymore?
Very, very good points. So I'll go backwards. I think you bring up some good points. Once you improve the property value next door, the property your land taxes go up, but your value goes up as well too. There's a law in the Virgin Islands that no one's property tax can go up more than 10% in any single year. If you're suggesting that when we have a district that we're developing, that we freeze the property tax around those developments for a set a given time, that's a good recommendation to the legislation. So you asked about what happens, who does the proceeds go to? So the person who's developing the property is going to have a documented rate of return, just like the phone companies are regulated by the PSC. So that's why it goes before the judge. So the conservator takes a development plan before the judge that says the developer is going to invest $300,000. He wants a 10% rate of profit on that $300,000 annually. At the end of the year, if let's say he got I'll do simple math. That would be $30,000 investment. If the rate of return is established that he's only to get $20,000, the other $10,000 would go into the estate of the people who, or person who owns the property. No, in this legislation, no property can be liened on. No property can be liened on. So if you give up your property for conservatorship, the person developing that property cannot take a lien against that property. So the owners are never in danger of losing their property through mortgage or over mortgaging the debt. It makes it harder for an investor because now they got to find something else as collateral to develop the property, but we have already included that in the law. I think I answered all.
Yeah, I think the point about the negotiations.
Right, so the conservator is negotiating with the developer, but then it goes before a judge, and the judge have to approve of the plan.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for those questions, great points.
They were very great questions. Thank you, sir. 2 minutes?
Yes, sir. Good night. I just got a comment and a question. Concerning this development, well, it's 2 questions. Who are the developers and where are they from?
Anybody. Anyone can be a developer. You, anybody.
Anybody says from here, anywhere.
It don't matter.
Okay. Now, the next question I have too is, you see, a lot of people came here and there were concerns about the schools, like Charles H. and all these things. Can this plan be implemented? I think you answer some kind of part of it this year, implemented into doing that for the same thing for the schools.
So
because of this here, the reason why I say this is because those are also historical, if you catch my drift. They have been around for how long? You know, Charles H. Well, the Elena is new, but you know, these are things that we should be. This is why I think a lot of the people are saying these are more important than just the town hall. Now, I know Mr. Knight said he had some vested interest in why he want this done because he have property too. You know what I'm saying? That needs help and needs building up.
Me too.
So this is another thing, a concern why the trust.
Right.
People now looking at you and saying, the only reason you're doing this is because you personally have a vested interest in it. Like, it's just because your involvement of, I have a property, it need fixing, it need this, I need help, blah, blah, blah. But there are people out here that doesn't have historical sites and historical, they just have a house that they struggle and property they find and bought and build their house. Hurricane came, and they still got blue roof.
Right.
You know, a lot of them came, they did work on my roof. My rafter is still about this much off from the concrete. It's only because it had rebar running through the rafters them on the side is why it ain't gone away. You know, they came and they did a half-tail job on top of our thing. You know, so now the next thing I have to say is a comment, Governor, right? Not because your governor grants you respect. You earn that. You have to earn it. You gotta earn it by showing the people what you could do, not just talking it. Because right now, a lot of people, and this thing with this young man here, you gotta let them have their opinion. Everybody is allowed to have their opinion. It doesn't have to be the same as yours, aligned with what you think. But you can't stop him from saying and feeling how he feels. So to get respect, you have to give it.
What's your name, brother?
Thank you so much for your comment.
Kali, I just want to, you know, there's so much misinformation in this community that's repeated and repeated and repeated that people believe is true. And it's not true. I mean, you know, I don't think there has been a step to help people that this administration hasn't taken. It's just like what you're saying about the school, Kali. I want Ms. Actalin just explain to you, you know, all these things that people are talking about, we already have plans and those things are in motion. This is something we don't have a thing to address. That's why we're coming to you to hear what you have to say. But people come to these things to fight. I don't want to fight with anybody. I want a solution to making Frederiksted look better. For the record, I don't have any historic property. My grandfather left my mother and her two siblings a property that's not in a historic town, that's not developed. But them 3 children, they got about 15 children between them. So it's a probate mess. So I feel people pain. I know what you're talking about. And when you have those discussions with people you love, it'll turn terrible. It's a very bad situation. I don't even like to have my brother right there, he tell you, when my father died, I didn't want to fight with nobody about that. I ain't losing my brother for no property argument. But I want Ms. Williams to explain to you about the schools and what's going on there.
Yes. So I just wanted to give an update on the schools. All of the schools that we have in the territory, all of them were not funded by FEMA. We've been working to get the funding from FEMA. We've recently begun to get a number of schools obligated. For instance, the Central High Schools, not obligated. We don't have the money yet from FEMA, but it's almost there. What we're doing in the meantime is developing all of the plans. We've recently gotten funding for Claudio School. We've started designing, getting ready, just doing the design on how we're going to rebuild and modernize Claudio School. And the plan, thank you, the plan after that is that we are going to put these schools together and put them out to bid so that we can start rebuilding the schools for the territory. This school, the St. Croix Educational Complex, we fought and fought and fought for FEMA because all they wanted to do was give us money to repair a portion of it. And we went back and forth when we looked at all of the work that's need to be done to get AC into this school. And we finally gotten to a point that we have the funding and we're doing the designs for this school. So this school is going to be the first school that we are going to repair. And we're also pushing for Central High and CAHS, and we're executing the contracts for those schools this year, so we're going to begin issuing the award for the new schools, new high schools in St. Croix, as well as on St. Thomas. So we are moving forward and getting the schools done, and to the level that it can rival any school on the mainland.
Explain why we shy away from permanent repairs from FEMA. What FEMA does when we do permanent repairs?
Oh, so the temporary, right. Oh, when we do temporary repairs. So there's a couple of things that we didn't do correctly in the beginning. First of all, we were supposed to preserve the schools. When there's a storm that passes, we need to go in and salvage everything out of the schools, not leave them, not let horses run through them, because it counts against us when it's time to provide the documentation to FEMA. So we can't go in and do temporary repairs or start to do anything because it affects the amount of money that we will get in the long run. So if I put in, let's say I replace all these lights completely to brand new lights, when it's time to negotiate the funding, FEMA's gonna say, oh, these are all brand new lights. It doesn't matter, you've already replaced them, you can't get the funding for that. So it takes back, so we subtract, and with the cost that it takes to do construction here, we won't have enough. So we have been going back and forth with FEMA to get numbers that would allow us to build proper schools for our children.
So we're running out of time, so these 6 people, minus Frankie, these 6 people, and then we're gonna have to wrap up. Go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening. I have a comment and 2 quick questions. I know it was mentioned that one of the reasons why it's a challenge to have government operations in Frederiksted is because of parking, but I don't entirely agree about that because there's ample parking in Frederiksted across from the park. It's been that way for many years unless there's plans to revamp that parking or do something different. I grew up in Frederiksted and there's always been parking and government businesses there, government organizations there. And then I share the concern about Aldersville. I think it's important to breathe life into Frederickstead through commercial businesses, rentals, and so forth. But it's also really important to have the elderly to have something to do in Frederickstead as well. I went 1 year to Aldersville for a summer and did arts and craft, and all of us have to realize we're all going to get old. The elderly is very important in the community. They're really important in raising kids, teenagers, young kids, adults, just mentorship, telling stories, sharing the culture. So I don't fully agree with changing Aldersville to a commercial piece of property. I recall it quickly mentioning for something for the Fred. So it should be a combination of commercial and still the community as piece of Frederickstead, and not fully moving out community-based things and people to make it entirely commercial. So that's, I think a lot of people would feel strongly about that, about having Aldersville remain or be rebuilt for the elderly.
Agreed.
And then my question, one of my questions is, it was mentioned that the owner of the property can have a say on who the conservator would be. Would the owner also have say in what the plan would be, or is it just on the conservator? And then my second question is, once it's under conservatorship, if the owner wants to give the property to a family member, I'm hearing or getting the impression that it's not going to be as easy to say, hold the brakes and reverse. I no longer want it under this process because an investor may have already spent money and poured blocks and laid pipes for wiring and so forth. What it would be the process to put a pause and reverse, or maybe there is no opportunity to do that and they just have to wait it out until that investor makes back their money and then it goes back to the owner and then they could give it to their family. So that's a long question, but I hope I made those two questions clear.
Yeah. So the conservatorship travels with the property. So you as the owner have a right to do whatever you want to do with the property. You can transfer ownership. However, the conservatorship travels with that transfer of ownership until it is ended because the blighted condition has been remediated. What was...
So every plan has to have a buyout option for the owner. So if you have an investor is not going to invest in a piece of property that they can't get their money back out of it. So if it's a 20-year plan, there'll be a formula that allows the owner to pay back the investor their money and their investment in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, in year 4. So it'll go as the property goes, certainly. But the rate of return for that investor would be established from the beginning. So that would be what Carl is talking about. Is the property is yours, so you could deed it to somebody else, but until the term of that conservatorship is done, or there's some buyout from the owner. No, and then we can't have, if you have 20 heirs, right? We will never get anywhere if we allow 20 heirs to speak on what should be done with the property, which is a problem now.
Yeah.
So no.
So the one follow-up question I would have or concern would be the involuntary process. That second option would be a concern for a lot of people because you mentioned the buyout option. If I have a property and I don't even have the money to fix it up modestly, and then an investor proposes, hey, I want to take this property over, and they make it into a commercial property, certainly I won't be able to buy that out because it's very costly. So if you guys can take another swing and look at the involuntary piece, for people, that would be good to take another look at it.
So, and thank you for your comments. It brings up a good question because the judge now, that as Carl was saying, when you go before the judge, you can say, well, I don't want my property develop as a property. The judge is going to say, well, this place is falling down. The rats and roaches are in there. People selling drugs out of there. It's a blight on the community. You have to do something. At that point, you can make an arrangement. The judge may say, well, we give the government the right to take down the building. Then the property is neutral. There's nothing there. But you got to have some remedy for that. So not every property is going to be developed because some of it just don't work. We have plots that are like maybe 400 square feet or 800 square feet. You can't really develop anything and get your money out of that. So at least we'll be able to take down the building and it'll just be a flat lot.
Thank you so much for your
Right, and I think, so yes, the property generates income, it pays for the development of the property. You still have your ownership rights. One of the things the attorneys and I have discussed is putting a cap. So you have to file a plan with the court that is reasonable, that has a reasonable time frame for recouping whatever investment you're putting in. So you can't say, I'm going to put a $3 million investment in a $200,000 house and come up with an economic plan that says, and I'll take 50 years to recoup my money. So one of the things that we have been toying with is what's the reasonable cap to say, look, this is the maximum time frame. You have to present a plan that says you can do this in a reasonable time frame. You're not going to take possession of this property forever. You're going to get in, you're going to get out, you're going to remedy the blighted condition, you're going to get out of the property, and of course, the appreciation and value for that property goes to the owner. So any investment that's made, once you recoup your expenses that you put in to fix it up, the overall appreciation and value of that property is attributed to that property owner and their estate.
Mike is on. Good, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I come in peace. I have to make that declaration because every time I talk, people think I come for war. Whenever I come for war, I also make that declaration. I like giving positive criticism all the time. Whenever I criticize you, I would like to think as I was positive. And when I do that, I would like to say something greatly positive. Governor and everybody on stage and everybody else who are instrumental in bringing this forward, I'd like to say the positive first. Thank you for bringing this out in this public forum. At least we're hearing something about it before we hear it out in the legislature. Thank you for that. That's a positive. Everything else I'm going to say after that will also be positive. You may not like it, but I'm only doing it so we can be better. Okay? All the people that came here today didn't leave the house to be negative. You mentioned earlier that we don't understand, we're misinformed. But I think the reason why we're misinformed is because the information is not flowing to us. There are lots of things that's happening that we're hearing about it after the fact. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to jump off the topic a little bit. The bridge right there by the Cayman is closed. I travel that road every day, and every day I forget that it's closed. I don't know why. I'm hearing rumors, but I don't know why. So the misinformation is really lack of information, not necessarily misinformation, but lack of information. So we need to work on that from that end. Okay? Now, one of the things we like to do in our beloved Virgin Islands is we like to implement nice, shiny programs and nice, shiny things without any analysis or assessment. And we jump from one shiny thing to another without assessing how well the first thing worked or didn't work. Mr. Knight, you mentioned we have about 3 government agencies that is taking care of derelict buildings, especially in our 2 historical districts. And you mentioned, for example, the St. Croix Preservation Society. And I am in Frederiksted, Queen Street and King Street just about every day. I play dominoes almost every day down there. I haven't been there for a little while, but maybe a week or 2. But I see that building. One of these days, they might fall. I hope it doesn't fall on somebody. Now, I would like to ask to Mr. Knight, how are these programs working? And if they're not, have you assessed them, number one, to see how well they're working? And if they are, why change things? I don't think they're working because I see Frederiksted all the time, and Frederiksted is a mess.
Let's allow the panelists to respond. Let's allow the panelists to respond.
Okay, I had more. Okay, go ahead and I'll.
So anyway, short answer is no, we wouldn't be having this conversation if, and I think I started my presentation by saying, we've tried things in the past, they haven't had the effect that we need them to have. That's why we're having this conversation tonight. And no, I didn't mention the St. Croix Preservation, I specifically left them out. But yeah, those programs have not had the impact we need them to have. We've tried Enterprise Zone, we've tried a number of things, helping people with probate and trust issues. We've done a myriad of things over the last 2-3 decades. it obviously hasn't worked.
One of the, if I may, go ahead.
Problem, and I know people, there's a couple other people I want to ask questions, but the main problem is funding. I mean, you said it here yourself, right? People don't have money in order to develop these properties. The banks don't lend it. So the government now is stepping in and saying, hey, we're going to help the people who have deeded properties to develop their properties. We're going to mix grant and loans because we have money now. We have HUD money. HUD wants us to spend it on creating affordable rental properties all over the Virgin Islands. And why not use some of that money to create affordable rental opportunities in town? You know, the problems in the Virgin Islands, a lot of you I've seen in these town hall meetings for years. I've sat where you sat. The problem always is we don't have money. This is one time when we have money to put towards these things. We don't want to be foolish with the money, but we definitely want to get something done. So I understand people being angry, but angry without solution leaves you in the same place. We're coming here to talk to people so you can say, okay, what else do we need to put in this to make sure people are secure in their properties and we get it done? Genevieve.
If I may just wrap up because my time wasn't out, you had me stop so he could answer my question. I would like to finish my 2 minutes. If I may, if you say no, I'll step away.
Your 2 minutes actually did elapse, but just for not a transition from peace to war, save the commentary and ask that last question. Just ask the question.
My final thought is, in the town of Frederiksted, it's a historical district. If that was the stable at Bethlehem where Jesus was born, that would be historical. But I don't think every single, and that's my opinion, I don't think every single building in the town of Frederiksted is a historical building because it's in the historical district. One of the problems some of the property owners have in Frederiksted, not all of them, have is that they're asked to build back with the old Danish architecture, and that does not fit their business model, and they're in a standstill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we plan to look at the historic preservation rules already. I think Senator Gittens has a piece of legislation, and somebody else another senator has a piece of legislation to address that part of it. Maybe Senator Frankie Johnson.
And we want to make a distinction between historically significant and just old. And so you're absolutely right.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Governor. Good evening, everyone. One of the things that we face is we've done it many times. For example, the Land and Water Use Plan, which now there's actually a working group, which I happen to be part of. What we need to do is bring this to the community level. My question is, what is the office doing, the administration doing, to ensure that we are working on capacity? A lot of times we suffer in our Virgin Islands from capacity issues, hence the very protracted, slow delivery of the DR funding and mitigation. We see there's challenges with VIHFA and then ODR having to step in. What are we doing in that particular space to build a capacity so that as we go through this process? The next step is there going to be a consideration for an advisory group? Because we have a lot of silos, CZM, Historic Preservation Office. The other day I had to address something as simple as business owners wanted to put their name and their phone number in their businesses. That took 2 meetings to resolve. So we have challenges with these boards. What effort is going to be made to bring it to a level where we're going to have actual strategic efforts, where there be an advisory group, that it just not be, because it will be the same as it was before. I remember when the probate effort was made years ago. I was actually in the room when I had that time when they were bringing it, and then I happened to be a law clerk when they were bringing the long legislation that they were going to put force on the people. So I appreciate the fact that we're coming out in a town hall fashion, but we're going to have to get it into a space where the community is involved. The Urban Land Institute worked with the Virgin Islands Housing Authority and brought about a feasibility study involving the community and elected officials and the like. We're going to have to get into that space. We have the historic preservation. We finally have the federal legislation. We've long had that St. Croix is a national heritage area. That was decades ago. So I really suggest that we get into an advisory group kind of situation, bring all the stakeholders together beyond the town halls. There are people in this room that could be part of those efforts if they do desire to be, and let us work on transparency, because also with the HUD funding, I'm very concerned at DR that we're out of time. And I'm also aware that you said waiver, Governor, but I don't get the impression that HUD is interested in giving us any more waivers, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay, let's allow the panelists to answer, please.
Yeah, I duly noted. I don't know what you mean by come to the community. It's like we've done this step by step. We brought in the agencies, we brought in the business people, we brought in the nonprofits, we're bringing it to you, we're bringing it to the senators, we open it up for comment and public for everybody to see it. I really don't know what else we do, but we'll take what you're saying under advisement.
Thank you.
No. Advisement.
Thank you very much, Governor. Good night.
Good night.
Good night to everyone that's here.
Good evening.
A task force should have already been put in place to secure all of these derelict buildings. There's no reason why. I listened to Mr. Knight talk about either health issues, safety issues, and I've sent a couple pictures to your Commissioner J.P. Uri in regards to a building in Frederickstead that's just about ready to fall. And the government have the obligation to do that. So that's no excuse as to why these buildings can't get secure temporarily. But my question really is, Interior Department gave, you got a lot of time, man. Interior Department gave some $25 million for historic preservation. Government spent some $10 million. There's about $15 million left. Out of that $15 million, there's about 4 families, 2 on St. Croix, 2 on St. Thomas, that's approved for these grants. Why are we not trying to utilize and exercise all of that grant money? Because there's some 200 people applied. And these folks ain't apply because they want to apply. They apply because they want to fix their property.
I think we spent all of the money. We haven't distributed it, all of it, but all of it obligated. All of it is obligated, right? I give Commissioner Oriole the mic.
Governor, I don't think.
I mean, just want to give you an example. So I heard about the money too, right? I sit every day and I look out at Lord God of the Sabbath Lutheran Church. I asked
Taking up my time, right?
No, you're all right. I asked a contractor how much it would be to paint the church. $170,000 for paint. That's what it is these days. So, go ahead.
All right, good evening, everyone. Jean-Pierre Oriole from DPNR. So, firstly, the award that the government received was $10 million, of which $7.5 million would be put out for grants to people. Second, it had to be that people occupied or inhabited those buildings at the time of the storm. They could not have been derelict or abandoned. We have now entered into agreements of about $5 million with the National Park Service doing the final reviews. So we had about 289 applicants. That ended up whittling down to about 66 awards that we could make for that $7 million. And so again, $5 million has already been obligated to folks. There's still another $2.5 million or so.
Am I correct to say only 4 people have been awarded thus far? Not even awarded.
That is incorrect.
Eligible.
That is incorrect.
How many people have been eligible?
I said 66 awardees have been selected. Not all of the awards
Come into your office for you to prove that to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for your question.
Ma'am.
Go ahead, Ms. Amy.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Graz-Carino, and I represent our town, Frederickstead. I have, first of all, I want to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to, state our claim and express our concerns. And I have one question and one suggestion. First, my suggestion is that the bill also needs to have language that stipulates that conservators or any other interested party who wants to serve as a conservator have cultural sensitivity to the people of the Virgin Islands and the communities that they're serving. Beyond that, my question is, does the legislation include specific timelines for the court to follow?
I don't think, so we haven't prescribed specific timelines for the court to follow. That might be laid out in the regulations, rules and regulations that govern the program. We are sensitive, so our first step with the court by legislation is to create and I think it was mentioned earlier this evening, a special, for all intents and purposes, we have the family court. We're talking about creating a housing court that deals with probate and these sort of issues. We don't imagine that there's going to be an overwhelming amount of these sort of conservatorships, but we think having someone dedicated to housing that deals with both probate and these sort of things would ultimately move the docket on the probate issues as well as this. So we haven't gotten to the point of what would be reasonable timelines for the court, but if we were able to have somebody, whether a magistrate or full-on judge or a special master, fulfilling that function, we think we could then really lock them down to some timelines.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The last question for the evening.
Check, we on? All right, great. Good night, everybody. Quick questions that I didn't hear anybody bring up. There's been two different words between developer and conservator. And is there a definition that we could make a distinction between the two?
The conservator represents the owners and their property. The developer is a person who is investing in the property and expects a return as a result of that.
Okay, so who owes who with that? It's just the conservator between the owner, or?
It's just like when you have if you have a child, their parents die, and the court appoints an executor of the estate that looks over the young person. It's the same thing. It's just somebody appointed by the court to make sure that the owner's rights underneath this law are not violated.
Okay, sticking in that same vein about family, are there funds in place? Well, you already talked about, you got a quote that it's $170,000 just for paint. So it's gonna be really hard to keep costs down if paint just costs $170,000 to say, all right, this project isn't gonna cost over $1 million. And if a family member dies, let's say grandma passes away before the debt could be returned or anything like that, are there any funds in place to have trusts set up before a conservatorship can be granted to make sure that it stays in the family and there's no wiggle room for that? Last question before my time runs out, or maybe second to last. Can you identify any development organizations already, and what protections do the property owners have against the conservator developer for suing and forcing a sale to recoup that money?
So the first step, once the judge decided that this is going to go into a conservatorship, is to establish a family trust. So if the original owner, let's say, is Grandma Bryan, it'll be the trust of Grandma Bryan, Genevieve Bryan, and all its heirs. So anything associated with the property, everything is in that trust. Any extra will go to that trust. And then your other question was
the liability. But as
you mean overbuilding the site? Remember, the protection against all of this is the court. Remember, this is a judge who has to approve every step of this. So the judges in the Virgin Islands are local. They're going to protect our Virgin Islands rights at all times. So.
And
I mean, that's one of the reasons why probate takes so long, because the judges don't dispose of the property. They try to keep the properties in the families.
And there can be no indebtedness on the property. I think that was the question about what prevents it from. There can be no indebtedness. So for that individual, we could say developer/contractor, whoever it is that ultimately comes in and puts in the work, right? The nonprofit isn't going to do the work themselves. They're going to bring on board somebody to either make the investments, even if it's just a contractor to be paid out of grant funds. That's a separate entity. They have an interest in a relationship. That's all filed as part of the economic plan, but in no incident can the conservator put any lien or indebtedness on the property of the individual who is in conservatorship.
Attorney Havicorn, did you have a statement? You did? Okay. All right.
So I just want to thank everybody for coming out. I know it got contentious at times, but we have to have these dialogues, these discussions. We have a lot of ideas. We want to hear your ideas. But the point of this matter tonight is, people, we have to do something. It's very scary. Like I said, it involves a lot of trust. But this is a small time in the Virgin Islands where the government actually has the resources to help people, to help the community rebuild our towns and our historic districts. So we'll incorporate the ideas we heard in tonight, the protections we heard tonight, and try our best to produce a piece of legislation that we all could live with. Thank you so much for coming. Love you. Get home safe. Good night.
Thank you. And before you leave, I just wanted to let you know we do have refreshments for you in the back. We thank each and every one of you for attending and your comments. Please have a safe drive home. Good night.